In a room trained to obey tradition, one small gesture became impossible to ignore. Princess Anne stood before Queen Camilla, surrounded by watching faces, and refused the bow everyone expected. But the real shock was not Anne's silence, it was Charles's reaction. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe, because this story is only beginning, and what happened next shook the quiet walls of the monarchy. Everything about that royal gathering had been planned to feel perfect. Every step, every greeting, every pause carried the weight of centuries. In the world of the British monarchy, nothing is ever just movement. A nod can mean respect. A silence can mean danger. And a bow can decide where power truly sits. Camilla had entered this new chapter not as a visitor, not as a guest beside the throne, but as queen. That title changed the air around her. It placed her above many who had known her for years, above people who had once seen her as an outsider, and above family members who still carried memories they were never allowed to speak aloud. The room knew what was expected. Senior royals were meant to show respect, not only to Camilla the woman, but to Camilla the queen. It was supposed to be a smooth moment, one more sign that the family had accepted the new order. Then Anne stood there, calm and still, and did not bow. There was no loud insult, no sharp words, no open scene. That made it even more powerful. Her refusal was quiet, but it cut through the room like a warning. No softness came across her face. No attempt was made to cover the moment. She simply held her ground. The courtiers felt it first. These were people trained to notice the smallest breaks in royal behavior. They knew this was not confusion. It was not forgetfulness. It was a message. Anne had spent her whole life inside this system. She knew the rules better than almost anyone. So when she refused to follow one, it meant something. It meant she wanted it seen. It meant someone, somewhere, had crossed a line she would not pretend to accept. Across the room, Charles saw it, and in that instant, his face told a story his mouth could not. He understood before anyone explained. This was not only about Camilla. This was about loyalty, history, and wounds the palace had tried to bury under new titles. Camilla stayed composed, as she had learned to do for years, but beneath that calm surface, the damage was already done. A queen had been denied acceptance in front of the very family meant to protect her. And in that missing bow, the monarchy's hidden fracture opened. Queen by title did not mean queen by heart. Anne's silence pointed toward old loyalties, private promises, inheritance battles, and a memory that refused to fade. But to understand why Anne would risk humiliating the queen in public, the story must go back to the one royal relationship Camilla could never replace. Anne was never the loudest royal, never the most theatrical, never the one who begged for attention. But behind her discipline was a loyalty so fierce that even Charles could not command it. And Camilla, no matter how high she rose, had walked into its shadow. To understand Anne's refusal, one must understand the kind of royal she had always been. Anne was not built from soft speeches or public charm. She was built from duty. She learned early that the crown was not a decoration placed on someone's head. It was a burden carried every day, even when no one clapped, even when no one thanked you, even when the world judged every move. While others became symbols of drama, romance, or scandal, Anne became something harder to shake. She became discipline in human form. Her loyalty was never simple emotion. It was not just the love of a daughter for her mother, though that love ran deep. It was loyalty to a system she believed had rules, lines, and sacred meanings. At the center of that world stood Queen Elizabeth II. To Anne, her mother was not only a parent. She was the living shape of duty. She had given her life to the crown, year after year, through storms, heartbreak, family wounds, and public pressure. Anne watched that sacrifice closely. She understood what it cost. And because she understood it, she did not hand out royal respect easily. That was where Camilla's rise became painful. Camilla had been given the title Queen, and by law, by ceremony, by Charles's will, the palace now expected the family to accept it. But acceptance is not always born from a title. Sometimes a title can open old scars instead. For Anne, Camilla's elevation seemed to ask the family to move too quickly, to smile too neatly, to act as if the past had not left deep marks. It was not just about one woman standing beside the king. It was about the palace asking everyone to rewrite pain as peace. Anne did not need to attack Camilla with words. That was never her way. Her silence did the work. Her stillness carried the message. By refusing to bow, Anne seemed to defend an older order, one shaped by Queen Elizabeth's long reign and the values Anne believed came with it. She was not chasing attention. She was drawing a line. Charles may have expected obedience. He may have believed that his sister, after a lifetime of service, would understand the need for unity. But Anne had never been easy to command. She respected the crown, but she did not bend easily to pressure, even from a king. And that made her refusal far more dangerous than a public mistake. It became a symbol, a quiet defense of the late queen's memory, a warning that some loyalties do not transfer just because the throne changes hands. And once Charles realized this was not an accidental breach of etiquette, the atmosphere behind palace doors turned colder than anyone outside could have imagined. Publicly, Charles smiled. Privately, the insult landed like a blade. Because Anne had not merely refused a gesture. She had challenged the new reign in front of witnesses. And for a king still fighting to secure his authority, that was unforgivable. The room may have moved on, but Charles had not. He had seen enough in that one still moment to know it was not a mistake. Anne knew protocol. She knew what a bow meant. She knew what refusing it would say. And that was what made it sting. This was not some stranger questioning Camilla's place. This was his sister. A woman whose own service to the crown had made her one of the most respected figures inside the family. When Anne refused, the silence carried power. It told everyone that even within the royal bloodline, Camilla's acceptance was not complete. Behind palace doors, the mood changed quickly. The smiles faded. The soft voices grew careful. Aides began asking the questions no one wanted spoken too loudly. Did the public notice? Was there footage? Had anyone in the room already whispered it to someone outside? In royal life, a scandal does not always begin with shouting. Sometimes it begins with one aide lowering their voice, one phone call made after midnight, one small detail passed along like a secret too heavy to hold. Charles's team moved into quiet damage control. They did not want a story about division. They did not want headlines asking why the king's own sister would not bow to the queen. But Charles knew the deeper danger. This was not only about reputation. It was about control. If Anne could resist Camilla in public, then the new reign looked weaker than he could allow. When Charles confronted Anne, the tension was no longer hidden under ceremony. He wanted loyalty. He wanted respect shown to Camilla, not as a favor, but as a duty. To him, the crown had spoken. The family had to follow. But Anne was not easily pushed into guilt. She did not break down. She did not offer the emotional apology Charles may have expected. Instead, she stood on the weight of her own service. She had given her life to the monarchy too. She had stood beside their mother through decades of pressure. She understood duty, but she would not pretend that duty meant forgetting everything. That wounded Charles more than a public enemy ever could. Anne's authority inside the family made her refusal dangerous. People listened to her silence because she was not careless. Camilla understood this as well. If Anne could deny her that respect once, Others might begin to wonder what they were allowed to deny in private. The confrontation did not heal the wound, it deepened it. What began as sibling tension had now become a royal crisis. Yet Charles's anger was only the surface, because beneath Anne's defiance lay something far more dangerous, a hidden battle over who truly controlled the royal legacy. The monarchy has always survived by hiding its most dangerous conversations behind polished doors. Jewels, titles, homes, trusts, and private wishes are rarely spoken about in public. But Anne's refusal hinted at one forbidden question. What had truly been promised before the Queen died? After the public moment faded, the real fear began to grow in private. This was no longer only about a beau. It was no longer only about Camilla standing as queen and Anne refusing to bend. Inside the palace, people began to understand that the gesture may have been connected to something much deeper. Something older. Something hidden beneath titles, ceremonies, and carefully chosen smiles. Because in royal life, inheritance is never just about money. It is about power. It is about memory. It is about who gets to hold the symbols that tell the world they belong at the center. The royal jewels, the private rooms, the family homes, the honors passed from one hand to another, these things carry more than value. They carry meaning. A necklace can become a message. A brook can become a claim. A room can become a warning. To the outside world, these may look like beautiful objects and old traditions. But inside the monarchy, they can decide who is respected, who is remembered, and who is quietly pushed aside. For Anne, that meaning mattered. She had lived her whole life under her mother's rule. She had watched Queen Elizabeth protect the crown through pain, loss, and pressure that would have broken many others. So if Anne believed certain pieces, privileges, or honors carried her mother's true wishes, then Camilla's new place near those symbols may have felt like more than change. It may have felt like a takeover of history. Charles wanted unity. He wanted the new reign to look steady. He wanted Camilla placed firmly beside him. Not as a shadow, not as an apology, but as queen. Yet to Anne, that push may have looked dangerous. It asked the family to move forward by smoothing over the past. It asked them to treat old wounds as if they had healed simply because a crown had changed heads. But wounds do not vanish because the palace orders silence. And that was what frightened the courtiers most. Anne may have known things others did not. Private conversations. Final wishes. Emotional instructions spoken when the world was not listening. Perhaps she knew what her mother valued, who she trusted, and what she feared might happen after her death. That made Anne's refusal feel less like anger and more like protection. In that missing bow, Anne seemed to say she would not surrender the past. She would not let memory be locked away and replaced by a cleaner story. And somewhere behind the palace walls, whispers began circling around one secret meeting, one hidden conversation, one moment near the royal vault that could explain why Anne drew her line so sharply. And the deeper the palace dug into Anne's motive, the more one chilling possibility emerged. This was not the first time she had warned them. Long before the public refusal, Anne had allegedly made her position clear in private. No spectacle, no shouting. Just one warning delivered with the calm precision that made palace insiders nervous. If Camilla crossed certain lines, Anne would not pretend to accept it. That warning did not come like a storm. It came quietly, which made it more dangerous. Anne was never known for empty threats. She did not waste words for effect. She did not perform anger to make people look at her. When she spoke, people listened, because they knew she usually meant exactly what she said. And according to the whispers moving through palace circles, Anne had already made it clear that there were limits she would not cross. Even for Charles, even for unity, even for the new queen. At first, some inside the palace tried to explain it away. They called it grief. They called it stubbornness. They said Anne was still too tied to the old reign, too protective of her mother's memory, too slow to accept the new order. But that was the mistake. Anne was not simply upset. She was alert. She saw what others were trying not to see. Camilla was not only becoming more visible, she was being placed closer and closer to the sacred symbols of the monarchy, the places and honors that Anne believed carried the weight of Queen Elizabeth's life. To Anne, this was not about refusing Camilla as a person. It was about refusing a rushed rewriting of royal memory. The palace wanted smooth acceptance. Charles wanted his wife respected without hesitation. But Anne seemed to believe that respect had to grow from truth, not pressure. And if the family was being asked to pretend every wound had healed, then Anne would not play along. Her warning was simple in meaning. There were lines between the past and the present, and Camilla could not be allowed to step across all of them without consequence. Charles underestimated that. He believed duty would hold Anne back. He believed the weight of family, crown, and public image would keep her controlled. But Anne had spent a lifetime serving the monarchy without needing approval. She knew how to stand alone. And that made her different from those who could be softened by praise, guided by favor, or silenced by palace pressure. Camilla understood this too. Publicly, she remained calm. Privately, she began to understand that Anne was the one royal she could not easily win over. Charm would not move her. Position would not impress her. A crown would not erase what Anne remembered. Even William and Catherine were pulled into the heavy mood. They watched, careful not to choose sides too openly, but aware that something was building. Anne's warning had become a ticking clock. And when the moment finally came, she did not shout. She simply refused to bow. But Anne's act did more than wound Camilla. It forced William to confront the uncomfortable future waiting for his own reign. For William, the refusal was not just a family slight. It was a preview of what happens when unresolved pain is forced beneath a crown. As Charles defended Camilla and Anne defended memory, the future king saw the monarchy's greatest threat: loyalty divided by silence. William had grown up inside a family where silence often did the work of survival. Pain was rarely named. Anger was rarely shown. Old wounds were covered with duty, and duty was expected to make everything look whole again. But Anne's refusal proved something dangerous. The past had not disappeared. It had only been pushed down, waiting for the wrong moment to rise. To Charles, Anne's act was a challenge to his authority. To Camilla, it was a personal wound. But to William, it became something larger. It showed him what could happen when a family tries to build a new reign on top of feelings no one has truly faced. The monarchy could survive scandal. It could survive bad headlines. It had done that many times before. But a divided royal house was different. If loyalty inside the family began to split, then the crown itself could start to look weaker. William understood the risk. The public might not know every private detail, but people could sense tension. They could read distance. They could notice cold greetings, careful words, and missing gestures. Anne's refusal was small in action, but huge in meaning. It could become proof, in the public mind, that the family was not united behind Camilla. And if they were not united behind the Queen, what did that say about Charles's reign? That was the hard part for William. He understood why Charles wanted full acceptance for Camilla. A king cannot appear unsure of his own queen. Charles needed the family to stand behind her, not only for love, but for the strength of the monarchy. Yet William also understood something Charles seemed unwilling to face. Respect forced too quickly can turn into quiet rebellion. Duty can hold people in place, but it cannot erase what they remember. Anne's defiance carried that lesson. She had served longer than most. She knew the crown demanded sacrifice, but she also showed that service did not mean surrendering personal truth. That thought stayed with William. One day, the crown would be his. One day, He would have to decide what kind of reign he wanted to build. Would it be one that buried pain for the sake of public peace, or one that faced the truth before silence became poison? Catherine became a steady force in that tense atmosphere. She did not need to speak loudly to understand what was happening. She watched the mood around the family, sensing which words might calm the room and which ones might make the break deeper. Her presence gave William space to think. But even that calm could not hide the bigger fear. The monarchy was entering a dangerous test, and everyone inside it knew the wrong move could make the private wound public. William did not openly challenge Charles. That would have created another crisis. But something inside him shifted. Anne's refusal changed how he looked at succession, symbols, loyalty, and memory. The next reign, he realized, could not be built by ordering everyone to forget. Because forgetting is not healing, and silence is not unity. While William looked toward the future, Camilla was forced to face the one question no crown could silence. Had she truly been accepted at all? Camilla had survived scandal, judgment, whispers, and decades of waiting. But Anne's refusal cut differently. It happened not in headlines, not in memoirs, not through outsiders, but inside the family itself. And that made the humiliation almost impossible to defend against. For years, Camilla had learned how to live under pressure. She knew what it meant to be watched, blamed, mocked, and measured against ghosts from the past. She had carried public judgment for so long that silence had almost become part of her armor. Every cold headline, every cruel comment, every stare from people who believed they knew the whole story had trained her to keep moving. But this was not the same. This wound did not come from the public. It came from inside the royal circle, from someone whose bloodline and service made her impossible to dismiss. That was why Anne's refusal hurt in a different way. It was not loud enough for Camilla to answer without making herself look wounded. It was not open enough for the palace to punish without proving that something serious had happened. It sat in that dangerous place between insult and symbol. Everyone could pretend it was nothing, but everyone knew it was something. And Camilla knew it most of all. She had finally reached the title that once seemed impossible. She was queen. The crown had placed her beside Charles, and the palace had arranged the language of respect around her. But Anne's stillness raised the question Camilla could not escape. What good was a title if one of the strongest women in the family refused to offer the respect that came with it? What good was power if acceptance still had to be begged for in silence? The deeper fear was even sharper. Anne's gestures seemed to give life to the whispers Camilla had spent years trying to outlast. Those who doubted her place could now point to the royal family itself and ask whether Anne had revealed the truth everyone else was hiding. That thought made the insult more dangerous than gossip. It threatened to turn private rejection into public belief. Charles became protective, almost too protective. His need to defend Camilla came from love, but it also risked making the wound larger. The more he pushed for respect, the more obvious it became that respect was not fully there. Palace aides understood the danger. If Camilla confronted Anne, it could become explosive. If she ignored it, the silence might make her look weak. If Charles handled it, the conflict could look like a king forcing his sister to accept his queen. Anne, meanwhile, remained unmoved. To her, this was not cruelty. It was principle. She had not acted from jealousy or drama. She had drawn a line where she believed memory, duty, and truth had been pushed too far. And that made the tension harder to solve. Because Camilla was not fighting a rumor. She was facing a royal who believed she was defending something sacred. Soon the question was no longer about etiquette. It was about identity. Could Camilla truly command respect if Anne refused to give it? Could a crown silence doubt when doubt lived inside the family itself? And just as the palace tried to bury the insult, the one thing they feared most began to happen. The whispers started escaping the room. No royal scandal begins with a press release. It begins with a glance, a door closing too quickly, a servant hearing too much, an aide repeating one sentence in confidence. And after Anne's refusal, the palace whisper network became more dangerous than the moment itself. At first, the palace tried to treat it as nothing. That was always the first rule. If no one admitted a problem existed, perhaps the world would never understand what had happened. But inside royal walls, silence does not always bury a story. Sometimes it feeds it. The people closest to power began speaking in careful tones, passing the moment from one trusted ear to another. Someone had seen Anne stand still. Someone had noticed Camilla's frozen calm. Someone had watched Charles's face change before he could hide it. And suddenly, one missing bow became the secret everyone wanted to explain. The whispers did not move in one direction. They split. They twisted. They turned the palace against itself. To some, Anne had done something brave. They saw her refusal as a defense of Queen Elizabeth's memory, a quiet stand against a new order moving too fast. In their eyes, Anne had not insulted the crown. She had protected the meaning behind it. She had reminded everyone that loyalty could not be rewritten overnight. But others saw danger. To Charles's supporters, Anne had not defended history. She had weakened the king. She had chosen a public moment to place doubt over Camilla's authority, and by doing so, she had handed critics a weapon. They feared the message it sent. If the king's own sister could hold back respect, then what would stop others from doing the same in smaller, colder ways? Camilla's circle wanted the matter closed quickly. They understood that her title was secure, but her image still needed protection. A queen cannot look rejected inside her own family. So the palace began weighing its options. Should Anne and Camilla appear together again? Should Charles arrange a public show of unity? Should there be a shared smile, a formal greeting? A carefully placed moment meant to tell the world that nothing was wrong, but every solution carried risk. If they moved too strongly, they would confirm the damage. If they did nothing, the silence could become proof. Anne's allies were just as firm. They believed respect could not be forced by order, title, or fear. They argued that Anne had spent her life serving the monarchy, and if she chose not to bow, there had to be a reason deeper than pride. That made the argument harder to kill. Because Anne was not known for careless drama, her reputation gave the refusal weight. William's side stayed cautious. He could not be pulled into a fight between the past and the present. If he defended Camilla too strongly, he risked dismissing Anne's pain. If he leaned toward Anne, he risked challenging Charles. So he watched, measured, and waited, knowing the future crown could be stained by a feud he had not started. And the more the palace tried to control the story, the more powerful it became. The missing bow was no longer just a moment. It had become a symbol of divided loyalty, hidden grief, and a monarchy trying to force peace before the wound had healed. But the final turning point came when Charles realized Anne's refusal was not just about Camilla, it was about the kind of king he was becoming. Charles had spent a lifetime waiting for the crown. But no one warned him that becoming king would not make the past obey him. Anne's refusal forced him to see the truth. Power could command ceremony, but it could not command forgiveness. For Charles, this was the moment everything became painfully clear. He could sit on the throne. He could ask the palace to protect Camilla. He could expect his family to follow the rules that had held the monarchy together for generations. But he could not force Anne to feel what she did not feel. He could not order old wounds to close. He could not make the memory of Queen Elizabeth fade simply because a new reign had begun. And that truth struck harder than any public headline ever could. Anne's missing bow had become more than a personal insult. It had become a mirror held up to Charles's reign. In that mirror, he saw the danger of pushing too hard, too fast. He saw how love for Camilla, though powerful, had placed him in conflict with a different kind of loyalty. The loyalty Anne still carried for their mother, for the old order, and for the promises she believed should never be forgotten. Charles wanted peace, but peace built on silence was beginning to crack. Camilla's title remained secure. No one could take that from her. She was queen by ceremony, by law, and by Charles's choice. But Anne's refusal had exposed the one thing no crown could fully guarantee: emotional acceptance. That was the wound Charles could not easily repair. The palace could arrange appearances, it could release warm statements, it could place family members together in carefully managed moments. But behind all of that, the question still remained. Had Camilla truly been accepted, or had everyone simply been ordered to act as if she had? William understood the lesson as well. Watching Charles struggle with Anne's resistance showed him what the future might demand. One day, he would inherit not only the crown, but also the pain left behind by those before him. He would inherit symbols, jewels, titles, homes, secrets, and old grief wrapped in silence. And if he wanted his reign to survive with strength, he could not build it only on control. He would have to understand that loyalty has a heart, and when that heart is ignored, even the strongest palace walls begin to shake. Anne did not step forward with a grand apology. That was never her way. She did not turn the moment into open war either. Her power came from restraint. She had made her point without raising her voice. She had shown Charles that she could still defend the memory of the late queen, even when the palace wanted everyone to move on. And that made her silence more dangerous than any speech. In the end, Charles realized the refusal was not only about Camilla. It was about the kind of king he was becoming. Would he rule by demanding obedience, or would he face the pain his family had buried for too long? Would he protect Camilla at all costs, or would he accept that some wounds could not be covered by a crown? That was why one missing bow became more than a gesture. It became the warning shot of a monarchy still fighting the ghosts inside its own walls. And if Anne could refuse once, the palace had to wonder what else she might refuse when the next royal line was crossed. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this royal story, make sure to subscribe for more dramatic stories about the secrets, power, and hidden battles inside the British monarchy.